Hey everyone, welcome back to yet another important session on GST filings. Today, we'll see what are the registration requirements under the GST. Before we proceed, let us first go through what we learned in our previous session. In our previous session, we learned about what are the different components of GST: CGST, SGST, IGST, and UTGST. CGST, that is Central Goods and Service Tax, is levied by the central government. SGST is the State Goods and Service Tax. It is levied by the state government. UTGST, Union Territory Goods and Service Tax. It is being levied by the Union Territory Administrators. And finally, IGST. IGST is Integrated Goods and Service Tax. It is levied by the central government. IGST is initially collected by the central government and subsequently allocated to the state where the goods are ultimately consumed. Okay, so let us start with today's session. Who should register for GST? Every taxable person crossing a certain turnover threshold must register under the GST. GST registration assigns a 15-digit unique number. The GSTIN is linked to the PAN. This registration enables business to legally collect tax, claim input tax, fulfill filing requirements, and execute interstate supplies. Non-registration, when mandatory, can lead to penalties. GST registration depends upon the turnover of an entity. Any entity crossing the threshold limit must get registered under the GST. But in few cases, GST registration is mandatory, irrespective of turnover. For example, turnover above the threshold limit, interstate supplies, e-commerce operators, casual and non-resident taxable persons. For these SSEs, registration requirement does not depend upon the turnover of the entity. The registration requirements under the GST depends upon the turnover of the entity. If the entity crosses the threshold limit, it must get enrolled under the GST. But in few cases, there is a mandatory requirement to get enrolled under the GST. For example, if the turnover exceeds the threshold limit, the entity must get enrolled under the GST. If an entity is executing interstate supplies, it cannot do so without getting enrolled under GST. E-commerce operators. E-commerce operators like Amazon, Flipkart, they must get enrolled in order to carry on its business. Casual taxable person and non-resident taxable person are the set of person who are compulsorily required to get registered under the GST. Okay, so importance of GST registration. Why is GST registration important for an entity? To collect GST from customers, to claim input tax credits, to legally supply interstate goods and services, to do business on e-commerce platform, and to maintain business credibility. So, an unregistered person cannot collect GST from its customer. If it do so, it must remit the collected amount of GST to the government. Input tax credits cannot be claimed unless an SSE is registered under GST. Claiming input tax credit reduces the cost of a product. To legally supply interstate, an entity cannot execute any sales outside the domestic boundaries of the state until it is registered under the GST. Let's take an example. A small digital marketing agency in Pune serving clients in Hyderabad must get registered under GST if its turnover crosses rupees 20 lakhs or if it does interstate supply, that is from Pune to Hyderabad. Threshold limits for registration. As of 2025, the turnover threshold differs based on the nature of supply and the state. For goods, it is 40 lakhs and for services, it is 20 lakhs. This rate prevails all over India except for special category of states. For special category of states, the threshold limit is a little lower. It is 20 lakhs for goods and 10 lakhs for services. What are the special category of states? These are northeastern states along with states like Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Uttarakhand, etc. Additionally, a composition scheme is available to small taxpayers with turnover of up to rupees 1.5 crore for goods and rupees 50 lakhs for services. Composition taxpayers are required to pay a fixed percentage on their turnover as GST, say 1% in case of traders and manufacturers. Let us understand the threshold limit for registration with an example. Suppose I am a FMCG trader and I have closed my books of accounts as on 31st March 24 at an annual turnover of rupees 35 lakhs. So, during the financial year 23-24, I was not required to get enrolled under the GST as my threshold limit didn't exceed rupees 40 lakhs. During the financial year 24-25, my turnover exceeded rupees 40 lakhs, say in the month of September. So, I was required to get enrolled under GST the moment my turnover exceeded rupees 40 lakhs. During the year 24-25, I was required to pay GST only on the amount exceeding the threshold limit. Suppose I closed my books as on 31st March 25 at a turnover of rupees 52 lakhs. So during the financial year 24-25, I was required to pay GST on 12 lakhs, that is the difference between 52 lakhs minus the threshold limit, that is 40 lakhs. But effectively from the financial year 25-26, I am required to pay GST at any turnover. Say if my turnover is rupees 100, I have to pay GST on rupees 100. Let us understand what is turnover for threshold purposes. Turnover means aggregate turnover on all India basis of a person having the same PAN. It includes taxable supplies, exempt supplies, exports and interstate supplies. But it excludes GST itself and inward supplies on which tax is payable under the reverse charge mechanism. So suppose मेरी एक बेकरी की शॉप है, उस बेकरी में मैं ब्रेड भी बनाता हूँ और कुकीज़ भी बनाता हूँ. कुकीज़ का टर्नओवर 30 lakhs है एंड ब्रेड का टर्नओवर 12 lakhs है. सो गेटिंग इनटू दिस डेफिनेशन, अगर मेरा सप्लाई 30 लाख टैक्सेबल सप्लाईज है एंड 12 लाख एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाईज है तो मेरा एग्रीगेट टर्नओवर 42 lakhs होता है. द मोमेंट मेरा टर्नओवर 40 लाख एक्सीड करता है, आई एम रिक्वायर्ड टू गेट रजिस्टर्ड अंडर द GST. सिमिलरली सपोज मेरी 3 दुकानें हैं, एक दिल्ली में, एक जयपुर में और एक गुरुग्राम में. इंडिविजुअल टर्नओवर एक एक दुकान का 15 लाख, 12 लाख और 14 लाख रुपए है. इन एग्रीगेट अगर देखें तो मेरा टर्नओवर 41 लाख रुपए है. दिस 41 lakh is my turnover across all my shops but within the same PAN. So I must get registered under the GST. Mandatory registration. So far we have seen registration is required once the threshold limit is exceeded. But in few cases mandatory registration is required to be taken. For example, for interstate supplies, that is supplies beyond the domestic boundaries of the state. Any person making interstate supply of goods or services must get registered under the GST. For example, a trader in Gujarat shipping products to Maharashtra. He cannot ship his product outside the boundary of Gujarat until and unless he has registered himself under the GST. Casual taxable person. Who is a casual taxable person? A person who occasionally undertakes taxable supplies in a state or union territory where they don't have any fixed place of business. For example, an artist from Mumbai setting up a temporary stall in Delhi for an exhibition. He needs to get registered as a casual taxable person. Registration under the casual taxable person must be obtained in advance and the registration is temporary, that is valid for 90 days, which can further be extended up to 90 days. Input service distributor. Who is an input service distributor? An office that receives invoices for input services and distributes the tax credit to its branches having the same PAN. Example, a head office in Bengaluru pays for legal services for all branches and distribute the ITC to Hyderabad and Kolkata branches. कहने का मतलब है एक एंटिटी जिसके मल्टीपल ब्रांचेस हैं ऑल ओवर इंडिया, बट सर्विसेज के बिल्स जो आते हैं वो सेंट्रलाइज्ड आते हैं, वहाँ से उन बिल्स का डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन होता है टू रेस्पेक्टिव ब्रांचेस और उनके आईटीसी को रेस्पेक्टिव ब्रांचेस को डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर दिया जाता है. एन इम्पॉर्टेंट पॉइंट नीड टू बी नोटेड हियर, आईएसडी के केस में सिर्फ सर्विस रिलेटेड इनपुट्स ही होते हैं, इसमें कहीं भी गुड्स का इन्वॉल्वमेंट नहीं होता है. देन e-commerce operator, any digital platform that facilitates the supply of goods or services whether they themselves sell or allow others to sell. मतलब allow others to sell का मतलब है they act as an aggregator. Example, Amazon, Flipkart, Swiggy, Zomato, etc. Even if the platform does not sell anything itself, it must get registered because it is allowing others to use its platform. Person supplying via e-commerce platform. Even small sellers today who are selling their products on e-commerce platforms must get registered under the GST. For example, a small trader selling 3 lakh worth of handicraft on Meesho must register due to the applicability of section 24, that is mandatory registration. Next is person under the reverse charge mechanism. Any person who is liable to pay GST under the reverse charge mechanism must get registered. Example, a business availing legal services from a non-GST registered advocate. What is RCM, that is reverse charge mechanism? Under the RCM, the recipient of the goods is required to discharge the GST liability and not the seller. Non-resident taxable person. Foreigners doing business in India occasionally or temporarily need to get registered irrespective of their turnover limits. TDS or TCS deductors under the GST. Government departments or notified entities deducting TDS or TCS under the GST. Just like income tax, TDS is deductible under GST also. Government departments or other notified entities are required to deduct TDS against the invoices exceeding certain value. Voluntary registration मतलब स्वेच्छा से registration बिना किसी compulsion के. Any person can get registered under GST without the requirement of getting registered based on his turnover. There are certain benefits that accrue while getting registered under the GST. He can claim input tax credit on the purchases. Say, मैंने 1 लाख रुपए की परचेजिंग की है, उसके ऊपर 18% के हिसाब से 18,000 रुपये GST पे किया है. मेरी सेल 2 लाख रुपए की है, जिसके ऊपर मुझे 18% के हिसाब से 36,000 रुपीज़ यानी कि 36,000 रुपये की पेमेंट करनी है. नाउ एट द टाइम ऑफ पेमेंट I can utilize the 18,000 GST that I have already paid at the time of purchases. Hence, मेरी net tax liability होगी 36,000 minus 18,000, that is 18,000. Let's take another example. A graphic designer earning 14 lakh annually opts for registration to claim ITC on laptop, designing software and rented office. बट वंस गेटिंग रजिस्टर्ड अंडर द GST हमें सारे कॉम्प्लायंसेस करने पड़ेंगे, बी इट रिटर्न्स, इन्वॉइसिंग रूल्स, सारे इन्वॉइसिंग रूल्स को फॉलो करने पड़ेंगे, ऑडिट्स, एनुअल रिटर्न्स, एवरीथिंग नीड्स टू बी complied with. Exemptions from registration. No GST registration is required if you are supplying only exempted goods or services. For example, if you are a yoga trainer, you are not required to get enrolled under GST. Also, if you are providing primary educational services or healthcare services or dealing in fresh milk, you are not required to get registered under the GST. You are an agriculturist supplying your own farm produce, you need not get registered. you deal only in non-GST items like petrol, diesel, alcohol for human consumption. These are not within the ambit of GST and hence you are not required to get enrolled under GST. You are below the threshold limit and not covered under section 24 for mandatory registration, then also you are not required to get enrolled under GST. If you are required to get registered under GST due to any reason, say your turnover exceeded the basic threshold limit, or you are required to get registered due to the application of section 24, which mandatorily requires SSEs to get registered under certain circumstances, but you haven't obtained the GST registration yet, then the department will penalize you with the following amounts. It will charge rupees 10,000 or 10% of the tax due, whichever is higher. Say, if your total taxes due is 10 lakh rupees, then the department will charge 10% of this 10 lakh, that comes to rupees 1 lakh. Also, it will charge interest on late payment of taxes. GST authorities may also seize the goods lying in your godown or at your shop. You won't be able to issue a valid tax invoice. Also, the customer lose ITC, which ultimately affects the market credibility, and hence you will lose your customers. Let's take an example. A seller crossed 45 lakhs turnover but delayed registration. Department raised demand for tax plus 18% interest plus 25,000 penalty. So before we proceed to have an overview of the registration process, let us first take a few examples to understand the registration requirements. Example first, Priya is a freelancer web developer based in Jaipur. So Priya is a service provider. She earns rupees 8 lakhs a year and provides services to clients in Delhi and Bangalore. Will Priya be required to obtain GST registration? Yes. Even though her turnover is below 20 lakh, she is doing interstate supply of services which requires mandatory registration under section 24. Hence, we can conclude GST registration in this case is not voluntary but mandatory. Second scenario. Ramesh runs garment shop in UP, Bihar and Jharkhand. Each shop has a turnover of 12 lakh. His total aggregate turnover is rupees 36 lakhs. Will he be required to obtain GST registration? Let us analyze. Turnover is calculated on pan-India basis. Total is 36 lakhs. Since it's below the threshold limit of 40 lakhs, he is not required to obtain the registration. Although he must get registered once the turnover exceeds rupees 40 lakhs. Next, Aditi makes homemade pickles and sells them through Amazon and Flipkart. Her annual turnover is just rupees 2.5 lakhs. Will Aditi be required to get registered under GST? Yes. How? Let's analyze. Anyone supplying through e-commerce operators must register under GST, irrespective of the turnover. Hence, in this case, GST is mandatory as per section 24. Moving ahead. Casual taxable person at exhibition. A handicraft seller from Manipur participates in a 5-day trade fair in Delhi. She does not have a permanent shop there. Will that handicraft seller be required to get registered under GST? Yes, he will be required to be registered under GST. So, casual taxable person at exhibition. A handicraft seller from Manipur participates in a 5-day trade fair in Delhi. She doesn't have a permanent shop there. Will she be required to get enrolled under GST? Yes. How? She will be considered as a casual taxable person and she must apply for temporary registration in Delhi. She has to pay taxes in advance based on her estimated sales. The registration obtained by her will be valid for 90 days and it shall further be extended to a period of 90 days. Hence, in this case, GST registration is mandatory as per section 24. Next, tuition teacher working offline only. Samir provides offline tuition at home in Shillong, Meghalaya. His annual income is 9 lakhs. Will he be required to obtain registration? Since Meghalaya is a special category of state, the service threshold is rupees 10 lakhs. He is below the limit and not engaged in any interstate or e-commerce activity. Hence, GST registration is not required. But as soon as his turnover surpasses rupees 10 lakh, he must get registered under the GST. Voluntary registration for business advantage. Ritu runs a boutique in Mumbai with rupees 15 lakh turnover. She voluntarily registered for GST to claim input tax credit on fabric, tailoring machine and furniture. Even though she is not required to register, she has done so to claim ITC and appear more credible to the clients. Hence, voluntary registration is fully allowed and credible to clients. Hence, voluntary registration is fully allowed and it will benefit her business in long run. Input service distributor. A corporate head office in Delhi receives consulting services and wants to distribute the ITC to branches in Mumbai and Kolkata. As per section 24, input service distributors are mandatorily required to get enrolled under GST. Hence, the Delhi office must register as an ISD and distribute the credit via ISD invoices. Conclusion, GST registration is mandatory as per section 24. So let's move ahead and see the registration process overview. To get registered under GST, we have to visit the GST portal, that is www.gst.gov.in. After visiting the portal, we have to fill Part A of Form REG 01. Part A contains some basic details like trade name, legal name, PAN number, date of incorporation, and also we have to furnish the date of liability, that is the date on which we become liable to get enrolled under GST as per the provisions of the Act. Once the form is completely filled up, we submit the form using the OTP sent on the mobile number and email ID furnished in the form itself. Once the OTP is submitted successfully, we receive a TRN, that is temporary reference number. To fill Part B of the registration form, we have to log in to the GST portal using the temporary reference number received over mail or SMS. Once logged in, we have to submit the documents and the details as required in Part B of Form REG 01. Once Part B is completely filled up in all respect, along with all the attachments, it is also submitted using OTP. Once the form is submitted, Aadhaar authentication is mandatory. If Aadhaar authentication is not done, the registration form will not be processed. Upon the submission, we receive an ARN, that is application reference number. Once the form is submitted, the department has a timeline of 14 days to review and process the form. Upon review, if the department is not satisfied with the documents, it will further call for further documents. Once the form is submitted successfully, ARN is generated. ARN implies application reference number. This reference number is used to track the status of our application. So upon the submission of our form, it is assigned either to the state or to the center, that is to the state jurisdiction or to the central jurisdiction. The GST department process our application within the stipulated time, and if it finds any deficiency in the documents submitted by us or the information furnished by us, it calls for further clarificatory documents, and upon the satisfaction, it issues GSTIN. Once GSTIN is issued, we receive a provisional ID and a provisional password on our mail. We have to use this provisional ID and password to reset and create new ID and new password. And upon the creation of fresh ID and password, we can log in to our account and download the registration certificate under the tab Registrations. So this was the overview of how registrations is done on the GST portal. That's it for today's session. Thank you.